In the last class we had seen the poor girl child Maggie was left alone at home after her mother's burial because no one was ready to adopt Maggie. By understanding the situation, the miserable situation of Maggie, one person came forward and his name was Mr. Thompson, a wheelwright. He carried Maggie to his house. And today's class we will see what is the character of wife of Mr. Thompson and the reaction of Mrs. Thompson once Mr. Thompson took Maggie to his home. You may please take page number 80. From the first paragraph, page number 80, you will get an idea about the character of Mrs. Thompson, and her name is Jane Thompson, wife of Mr. Thompson. And from the same paragraph itself, we will get an idea about the expectations of Mr. Thompson about the reactions of his wife. So now you may please take page number 80. Now, Joe Thompson's wife, who happened to be childless, was not a woman of saintly temper, nor much given to self-denial for others' good. Now we will get an idea about the character, that is Mrs. Thompson. She was a childless woman. So these couples, Mr. Thompson and Mrs. Thompson, they were not having any children, and Mrs. Thompson, she was not a person of saintly temper. That means she was not having good temper. She used to get anger very fast for silly matters, nor much given to self-denial. That means she was not ready to sacrifice anything for others' good, and she was not ready to help others. And Joe had well-grounded doubts touching the manner of greeting he should receive on his arrival. So once Mr. Thompson, the wheelwright, carried Maggie to his house, he was having the doubts regarding the reactions he will get from his wife. Why? Because his wife, Jane Thompson, Mrs. Thompson, she was not a person of saintly temper, and she was not ready to help others. So Mr. Thompson was well aware about the reactions of his wife. Mrs. Thompson saw him approaching from the window, and with the ruffling feathers met him a few paces from the door as he opened the garden gate and came in. Ruffling feathers here is used in order to refer to the anger, the disturbance or the irritation Mrs. Thompson got. Mrs. Thompson or Jane Thompson, she saw her husband carrying an orphan child, that is Maggie. So she was very angry and she got irritated. That is why ruffling feathers, by gathering or disturbed feathers, she met him a few paces. Paces means few steps from the door as he opened the garden gate and came in. She saw her husband carrying an orphan child. He bore a precious burden, and he felt it to be so. As his arms held the sick child to his breast, a sphere of tenderness went out from her and penetrated his feelings. A bond had already corded itself around them both, and love was springing into life. So there is a bond created between Mr. Thompson and Maggie. You should understand that these couples, husband and wife, they were childless. So here a new bond created between Mr. Thompson and Maggie, and Mr. Thompson considered Maggie as a precious burden. So all others consider it as a brat and useless thing, but here Mr. Thompson is considering her as a precious burden. At the end of the class you will understand why Maggie is called a precious burden. And now we can see that Mr. Thompson was carrying the girl child and as his arms held the sick child to his breast, to his chest, a sphere of tenderness went from her. That means a close relations. A bond is created between these two people, Maggie and Mr. Thompson. Love was bringing into life a new bond, a new love that is created between these two people. Why are you there? Sharply questioned Mrs. Thompson. Mrs. Thompson was not happy by seeing that her husband carries a burden, a useless thing, that is Maggie. So she asked, "What have you there?" Sharply questioned Mrs. Thompson. Joe felt the child start a shrink against him. Shrink means to become small. That means because of fear. She thought that Mrs. Thompson may do something. So because of that fear, she was just shrinking in the hands of Mr. Thompson. He did not reply except by a look that was pleading and cautionary that said, "Wait a moment for explanations and be gentle." So in an answer to that, Mr. Thompson, he did not respond, but he made a look which was pleading and cautionary. That means pleading and paying a careful attention, which is said, "Wait a moment for explanations and be gentle." So his look conveyed the message that please be gentle and wait for the explanations. And passing in, carried Maggie to the small chamber on the first floor and laid her on a bed. Then stepping back, he shut the door and stood face to face with his vinegar-tempered wife in the passageway outside. So he carried Maggie to one of the chambers. Chambers means rooms in the first floor, and he laid the girl child there on the bed. Then he came back to face his wife. From these lines, we can understand one more speciality of the character of Mrs. Thompson, that is, she was a vinegar-tempered woman. That means the person who gets anger very fast. "You haven't brought home that sick brat." Anger and astonishment were in the tones of Mrs. Joe Thompson. Her face was in a flame. She was very much angered, and she said to Mr. Thompson, "You are not supposed to bring that girl child to home." Anger and astonishment. That means she was very much anger and astonishment. A surprise with the anger were in the tones of Mrs. Joe Thompson. Her face was in flame. So her face was in flame means she was very much irritated and she was very much angered towards her husband. "I think women's heart are sometimes very hard," said Joe. In an answer to that, Thompson said, "Women's hearts are very hard sometimes." Usually Joe Thompson got out of his wife's way or kept rigidly silent and non-combative when she fired up on any subject. So normally what Mr. Thompson used to do whenever there is a fight between his husband and wife, Mr. Joe Thompson and Jane Thompson, then he used to keep quiet in order to avoid more fight. So that was the policy Mr. Joe Thompson followed. He used to keep quiet in order to avoid more fight in the family. Usually Joe Thompson go out of his wife's way. That means he used to keep quiet whenever there is fight between husband and wife. But today he responded. It was with some surprise, therefore, that she so encountered a firmly set countenance and a resolute pair of eyes. By seeing the response from her husband, Mrs. Thompson, she was surprised. Why? Because normally her husband used to keep quiet whenever she started fighting. But on that day it was something very different. He responded. That is why he says, "I think women's hearts are sometimes very hard." So she was very much surprised. So therefore she now encountered a firmly set countenance. Countenance means appearance, a firm appearance and resolute pair of eyes. A firm pair of eyes with sharp questions. Women's hearts are not half so hard as men's. So earlier, Joe Thompson said that women's hearts are very hard. Now Mrs. Thompson, she reacts to her husband's comment and saying that women's hearts are not hard as men's. That means women's heart is compared to men's heart, women's hearts are very soft. She says, Joe saw by a quick intuition that his resolute bearing had impressed his wife, and he answered quickly and with a real indignation. Indignation means with a real anger. Now Mr. Thompson understood that his wife started to react to his comment. So he wanted to convey a message. That is why with the real indignation he wanted to say something. Impressed his wife and answered quickly. So here he wanted to convey a message. Be that as it may. So that may be correct. Woman's heart may be soft compared to men's. But every woman at the funeral turned her eyes steadily from the sick child's face, and when the cart went off with her dead mother, hurried away and left her alone in that old hut with the sun not an hour in the sky. So that is why Mr. Thompson said sometimes woman's heart is very hard. Why? Because he got an example. After the burial of Maggie's mother, no one was ready to adopt this poor girl child. No one was ready to take this poor child to their home. And there were many women and they were not ready to take this girl. That is why Mr. Thompson says that sometimes women's heart are very hard. Every woman at the funeral turned her eyes steadily from the sick child's face. No one was bothered about the child, and they went away with their worries. And no one was ready to take this poor girl child to their house. And with the sun not at hour in the sky. That means it was getting late and it was getting evening. So no one was ready. And no one bothered what will this poor child will do in the late night. And everyone went away from the place, even women. And that is the reason he says women's hearts are sometimes very hard. Where were John and Kate? Asked Mrs. Thompson. So in an answer to that one, Thompson says, Farmer Jones tossed John into his wagon and drove off. Tossed means thrown. So toss means threw, and tossed here, thrown into his wagon, into his car and drove off. Cathy went home with Mrs. Ellis, but nobody wanted the poor sick one. Send her to the poorhouse was the cry. So first two children, they were adopted by two different persons, and no one was worried about the third one. And all were demanding that send this poor child to the poor house. It was the cry, it was the demand from the people that send Maggie to the poor house. Why didn't you let her go? Then why did you bring her here for? So here Mrs. Thompson, she asked her husband that, so if it was the cry or if it was the demand from the villagers, then why did you bring this girl to our house? You could send that girl to poor house. She can't walk to the poor house, said Joe. Somebody's arms must carry her, and mine were strong enough for that task. So he says that why he carried this poor girl to house, because she is unable to walk to poor house. So someone should carry this poor girl to the poor house. And Mr. Thompson, he felt that his arms are very strong, and because of that, he carried Maggie to his house. Then why didn't you keep on? Why did you stop here? Demanded the wife. Then wife, Mrs. Thompson, she is asking to her husband that, then why did you stop here? You could take directly to the poorhouse this poor girl, because I am not apt to go on fool's errands. The guardians must first seen and a permit obtained. There was no gainsaying this. When will you see these guardians? Was asked with irrepressible impatience. Tomorrow. So here Mr. Thompson says that she is not a person who goes on with a fool's errands, with a fool's mission. Why he says so? Because in order to get admission there in the poorhouse, first he should see the guardians, then the permission should be obtained. Then only one person can get admission there in the poorhouse. And first that procedure should be done. Then only there is use in carrying this poor girl to the poorhouse. That is why he says, I am not a person who always go on with the fool's errands or mission. Errands means mission. Then in an answer to that one, Mrs. Thompson, she says that, then when are you planning to carry this girl to poorhouse or see the guardian? Then Mr. Thompson, he says that tomorrow, the next day, he is planning to send Maggie to the poorhouse. And he understood that there is no gainsaying. Gainsaying means benefit in saying such a kind of things, because anyway his wife will get irritated. Why put it off till tomorrow? Go at once for the permit and get the whole thing off your hands tonight. When Joe Thompson said tomorrow he is going to, or the next day he is going to see the guardians, then the wife says that, why did you keep it for tomorrow? The very day itself, he must go and do the formalities and free from the responsibilities about the girl child. Jane set the wheelwright with an impressiveness of the tone that greatly subdued his wife. I read in the Bible sometimes and find much said about little children, how the Savior rebuked the disciples who would not receive them. Now he makes a reference to Bible, and he says to his wife that he read in the Bible that Jesus Christ, the Savior, how he treated and what was the attitude of Jesus Christ towards the children. And when his disciples were not ready to receive the children, then Jesus Christ, he used to criticize the disciples, because Jesus loved children. So here Mr. Thompson makes a reference to Bible and the activity or the attitude of Jesus towards the children. Now you may please take page number 82. How he took them up in his arms and blessed them, and how he said that whoever gave them even a cup of cold water should not go unrewarded. So here from the Bible he is quoting, and he says about the attitude of Jesus Christ towards the children. He criticized the disciples when disciples denied children to come to Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ used to carry them in his arms. That means children. He used to carry children in his arms, and he used to bless the children. And once he said that whoever do a small thing for a person, a cup of cold water should not go unrewarded. A person who does a small help to other person, he will get his own reward. The person would not go unrewarded, because if we do a small help to any person, giving a cup of water, that is enough. Jesus says that you will get your reward for that one. Now it is a small thing. Mr. Thompson says to his wife that we are doing a small thing. What is that? Keeping Maggie for one day. It is a small thing for us to keep this poor motherless little one for a single night. It is a small thing, just like Jesus said earlier. What he said, giving a cup of cold water to one person, he will get his own reward. So quoting or referring to that one, Mr. Thompson says that we are doing a small help to this poor girl, keeping this girl one night here, single night. To be kind to her for a single night, to make her life comfortable for a single night. So that are the small things we can do for this girl child, and we will get our reward later, because this person believes in Jesus Christ and his commands. The voice of the strong rough man shook, and he turned his head away, so that the moisture in his eyes might not be seen. That means the person was literally crying. The strong person, he started to cry. Mr. Thompson, after realizing the situation of the poor girl child, and in a way this strong person was crying. That is why the author mentions that the moisture in his eyes might not be seen. That means the tears in his eyes might not be seen by his wife. The strong man's voice shook because of all these emotions, because of all this mixture of emotions. Mrs. Thompson did not answer, but a soft feeling crept into her heart. So there is a soft feeling, a soft corner towards her husband started to emerge in the mind of Mrs. Thompson. So she did not say anything to her husband. Look at her kindly, Jane. Speak to her kindly, said Joe. Think of her dead mother and the loneliness, the pain, the sorrow that must be on all her coming life. The softness of his heart gave unwanted eloquence to his lips. So here Mr. Thompson asked his wife to do something. What all are things? Look at her kindly. Speak to her kindly, said Joe. And think about the dead mother and the conditions of this poor child, and the loneliness, the pain, the sorrow that must be on all her coming life. The future. Why? Because there is no one is there for this poor child. So you just think about that one. The pain and the loneliness that this girl is going to face in her life. The softness of his heart gave unwanted eloquence to his lips. Unwanted means it is not something habitual, not habitual. So now an eloquence, a politeness to his lips. That is enough for today. You may please go through the portions that we discussed today, and if you have any doubts you can send the messages. Thank you. Have a nice day.